we're in the first little inch of the inchworm on understanding the impact of cybersecurity. We don't even have the sheet pulled up to understand what's under there yet.
Welcome to the Industrial Cybersecurity Insider. In each episode, we dive into the world of industrial cybersecurity. Join us as we cover the latest trends, innovations, and practical insights as we talk with leaders and practitioners across the industry. Gear up and let's get into this week's episode.
Hi, this is Dino, and today we have with us Dick Wilkinson, who's the CTO and co-founder of Proof Labs. Welcome, Dick.
Hi, Dino. Nice to meet you.
So where are you located?
I am in Colorado Springs, Colorado.
You a skier?
No. I like the snow, but flat ground. Yeah.
We can catch up on that conversation later.
Sure.
I just came out of the mountains myself a couple of weeks ago. So
Gotcha. I love the mountains, but I try to keep it at a slow speed.
Well, welcome to the show. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your journey, whether you want to start from the beginning and work your way to today or vice versa?
Sure. Yeah, we'll start with the history lesson and we'll come up to current times. So the story begins, as you can kind of see over my shoulder here. I was in the Army for 20 years. And so we get to skip a lot of the story because there's 20 years that are all just kind of one thing. I worked for the National Security Agency for most of my time in the Army. I did signals intelligence. I was enlisted for about 5 years and then became a warrant officer, which is the technical officers in the Army. Really enjoyed that. And that experience set me up for a future in cybersecurity. I finished off my career. I had a bunch of great assignments and I had a lot of space exposure and assignments directly in satellite operations. So as we talk about the company and some of the things I work on now, that's where that started, was in my Army assignments. My last 5 years in the Army were at Kirtland Air Force Base in Albuquerque, New Mexico. That's where I retired. And I was a lab director for a Secretary of Defense activity there where we assessed technologies in like a rapid sort of capability. And so we had radio frequency lab resources, and we also had a cyber lab. And once I got there, that's when my kind of branch over from very unique security things on the RF side to the more what we think of as IT penetration testing. That's where that happened. That set me up for an opportunity after I retired to work for the state of New Mexico. I was the Chief Information Security Officer of the Supreme Court upon retirement. And then I got promoted to be the CTO, which is the statewide judicial branch. So we had a lot of employees, big enterprise, all the, judicial records, the permanent record type resources that we had to protect. So it was a really cool opportunity to come out of the military and get to do that. Worked there for about 3 years, did that during the pandemic. I forgot to put in my bio that I was also at the Water Authority for Albuquerque and Bernalillo County. So I was the CISO there for about 6 months. During that time frame, I started my company, Proof Labs, and we incorporated in 2021 while I was still working for the state, I believe. Did a few consulting jobs here and there as we were getting the company stood up. But now I'm full-time cyber, signals intelligence is in my background. And I've been, a CISO kind of instructor and helper with writing courses and, with the different certification programs and things like that. So really like being part of the community. And when I saw this media outlet that you all operate, I said, wow, I think this would be a great resource to participate. So thanks for having me.
No, thanks for joining us today. So tell us a little bit about Proof Labs. So what's that all about?
Proof Labs is a cybersecurity company that's focused on space technology. And as I mentioned before, the reason that we did that is because I'm the CTO. I said, let's do what I'm most comfortable with, and let's work in a space where there is high value assets that require a lot of security. We had started out on the IoT side of the house. And for your audience, there's a lot of exposure to the explosion of IoT right now. Mm-hmm. Looking to try and make security solutions for more of the home user or not quite commercial or industrial grade products. And we quickly realized that there's not a big motivation for security solutions in that space. I felt like it was a broad market, but there's not a lot of adoption for security there. And so we didn't really get much traction, did that for about a year. And then we said, all right, my partner, I have my co-founder and CEO, Rick Aguilar. We said, we both have DoD background experience. He's been a contractor doing IT work for them for a long time. And we said, let's go back to the horse we know how to ride and let's go to the DoD and see what we can do. And satellites was just the right fit for us. So we make security software that's onboard intrusion detection for satellites. So that's a new field, and we're one of the first entrants into that market.
So outside of government, how many commercial organizations are actually using satellites today for communications, especially around manufacturing, which is kind of our focus on the OT side? But I guess oil and gas would probably be a big one, but
yeah. So oil and gas is a great example because they have a lot of backhaul requirement where there's remote locations where there are people or there's just equipment and there's not usually people. So they're definitely using satellite. And then of course they've got people that just need to use satellite phones and internet connectivity when they're out in remote locations. But there's satellite is built in so many different parts of critical infrastructure that people don't realize. There may be your primary link that's going to be terrestrial and maybe a cellular network or a microwave connection, but you've almost, in most places, if it's a critical component, you're going to have some satellite connectivity there as well for a bare minimum, an emergency way to contact that system. So honestly, the penetration of satellite use throughout any vertical, it's there. You just have to follow the network path and you'll find some satellite links in there.
So do you see control traffic, the traditional OT type assets going across the satellite network? When I think about, kinetic machines versus just data comms, for communications, but I'm talking about machine control, where I guess like on an oil rig, are they using satellites to communicate with control systems on oil rigs?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, there's remote control panels. There'll be some big central station that has, eyes and visibility into the primary operations of equipment that's actually deployed out there. And they'll be able to send commands and, turn dials virtually because everything's done on some kind of virtual kind of dashboard now instead of mechanical dials.
So it's an intrusion detection system. So are you doing the asset inventory, malware hunting, providing insights into communication paths, asset protocols, applications?
Yeah.
OT IDS is what I'll call it. The Armises and the Nozomis types of technologies.
The way to describe it is a lot of people don't think of satellites as a piece of OT equipment. And so while we're discussing it in this lane, I like to describe to people, especially in the space industry, if they're trying to determine where have they departed the IT network and they are now, probably in an OT data stream. A good line of departure there in satellite networks is, have you left TCP IP as your packet structure, and now you're in some other proprietary packet scheme? That happens in satellite equipment when you're at the satellite modem from the ground where the pedestal's at up to the spacecraft. You are most likely encapsulating TCP as an underlying data stream, and now you've got a different overlying data stream on top of that. And that is an OT connection, right? That is not a standard signaling system. That is not using regular ACK, handshake. It's doing something else that's persistent, and authentication is happening in a different way. So that's a good example of how OT is part of a satellite network. As far as intrusion detection, we're on orbit. Our software runs directly on the satellite. So we are watching several different attack surface control areas within the spacecraft. And we're using automated sensors, which are machine learning algorithms that can watch the traffic from the systems inside the spacecraft. Your vehicle, just like your car on the ground, it has an internal bus network, and there's CAN bus, which, a lot of the folks on this, audience are going to understand. Yep. CAN bus is used in spacecraft. There are satellites that use the same vehicle bus structure with the same signaling. And so we are watching and observing that type of bus signaling, and we're able to detect anomalies in behavior or in operational status of different parts of the spacecraft. So intrusion detection is, in this case, is a heuristic analysis of how's the spacecraft behaving based on previous understanding of nominal operations, and then being able to identify when even the slightest variation indicates that there's something wrong. One challenge here for space is that you can't automatically assume it's cyber intrusion. You have environmental concerns in space where you have space weather and you have performance and mechanical issues that can happen with your asset. And so part of our job will be to help those engineers who already respond when they get fluctuations in telemetry to understand, is that a mechanical fault or is that an intrusion that is masquerading as a mechanical fault? Is that the kill chain, right? That cyber intrusion is meant to perform. So that's where we're at within, monitoring things that can happen inside the spacecraft.
Yeah, that's interesting because, the sophistication at that level, I would call that, especially at the CAN bus level, the east-west traffic versus north-south. And which is one of the biggest challenges we see in manufacturing today is that that's not an area that they're really, it's not that they're not focused on it. They haven't implemented the sensors or the technology at that level to be able to collect that metadata within that machine center to get it to like an IDS system. So, because my belief system is that ideally you want to build that in when you build the machine. You can do it retroactively. It's just a little bit more disruptive and it's more costly. And you have to have folks that are inherently knowledgeable of that control system architecture, the infrastructure to be able to put that in versus doing it up front, which is kind of cool that you're able to do that with these satellite systems that you have it built in. I call it the OnStar, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It just comes with the vehicle, right? And
right.
I'd like to see it come with the machines when you buy it, that technology is there for you to use if you so choose to,
Yep. And we can do post deployment. So if you're already on orbit, we can deploy on spacecraft that are already in operations. We have a plan for probably 2 deployments this calendar year. We just wrapped up the development phase and the proof of concept, which is an Air Force Research Lab funded effort that we've been performing on for about a year. So I like to give the props to the government program here that sponsored us so that we were able to get this thing from, back of the napkin concept to something that's ready to go to space.
So you guys are the technology company, right? You develop the technology and the software.
Yes.
Are you also doing all the deployments and support, or you do have a channel or a partner community that you work with that? Or how does that all work?
Right now, we'll be pretty hands-on with a lot of it. There would be some really mature spacecraft manufacturers that could probably adopt the software into their internal processes and deliver the same type of maintenance service or other fault monitoring services that they provide to their clients. So those are some of the folks that could be the owner-operator level support. But right now, especially with government clients, they're going to want us to be hands-on, do the deployment, integration, and then even probably help inspect alarms or issues in the future, work with their engineering team to investigate those alarms.
And so the gist of it, though, is the Proof Labs technology is primarily for the operation and functionality of the spacecraft, right? It's not for control of machines on the ground, right?
Correct. Yes, it is protection of the asset that's on orbit. And, we've got some coverage for inbound commands and for protecting the memory in different parts of the spacecraft. But the data stream that's internal, that's going up and down on, sort of the bent pipe, that is obfuscated away from what we're protecting. Yeah. Okay. If the satellite's available and the data stream's moving, we're not inspecting that traffic right now.
This is all new technology for the spacecraft, right? I mean, it's not like you've got competitors in this space that are doing this today, right? I mean,
correct.
I haven't heard of any stories of where some of the OT IDS platforms that we work with are actually running on spacecraft.
Right. It's definitely, it's a migration of concepts from what works on the ground to how can you apply that concept in space, but you can't deploy a hardware, firewall that weighs a lot of, rack mounted space weight. You can't send that to space. There are probably, I'd say there's us plus maybe 2 other companies that are deploying similar technology or entering the market. There have been some satellite manufacturers that have looked into building it themselves, and they're finding that it may be something that the internal R&D that's required to maintain it and keep it running may be, buy over build. The buy option may be suitable for quite a bit of the manufacturers out there.
Interesting. So, given your experience, what cybersecurity risks do you see across the industry today, especially from a spacecraft perspective, but generally in the industrial world? What kind of challenges are you seeing, from a cybersecurity environment?
Yeah, this one of the questions, that I had reviewed before was, and I tried to put some thought into this, and I think that there is a opportunity to move from the old concept of the castle wall, the external perimeter, and let's guard the perimeter and still have kind of a soft inside. I'm not saying that anybody in a CISO position is okay with that, but I think it's accepted. It's accepted risk in a lot of situations. There is misconceptions around zero trust and whether or not you can even use zero trust in certain OT environments. And so I think that right now, some of the misconception that's still being accepted as, I don't know, common operation and common procedure is to really rely on that external perimeter hard line for your cybersecurity, and then have a little more gray area on your internal controls. And I think that's something that is past due for people to graduate from and fight the good fight internally. If you're a CISO or a security leader, CIO, CTO, I think it's time to get on board and start pushing the issue. If there's some issues you need to champion this year, maybe that's something you want to talk to your leadership or your board about and say, we're relying on a concept that's pretty old and we really need to move forward.
You're spot on like that. I like where you're going with that, because I have the same mindset that in our business, from a manufacturing perspective, is the CIOs, the CISOs, the CTOs, those that have traditionally that cybersecurity responsibility, are not engaging the OEMs and the system integrators who are doing a tremendous amount of work in their manufacturing facilities on a pretty consistent, regular, daily basis, right? Mm-hmm. And because we're on that side of the fence, right? I put us in that OT ecosystem, not in the IT ecosystem. And, sometimes, we're doing millions of dollars worth of, upgrades, brownfield, greenfield, expansion, lifecycle replacement, new products that the client may be wanting to run on their systems, and adjustments need to be made. And we just don't have that continuity between that IT leadership and the folks that are on the boots on the ground, as I call them, that are working in plants every day,
Sure.
trying to drive an OT cybersecurity method. So that I like where you were going, that needs to change, right? And it does. Somehow we got to get those folks engaged in who these organizations are. What are your capabilities? Who are your partners? What kind of practice do you have? What kind of partnerships do you have? What kind of services do you provide? Because I have a cybersecurity strategy I'm trying to implement, and I got this big gaping hole in my plans. To the squishy middle, as you called it.
Yeah.
I call it the last mile, in the plan. It's really the last mile is kind of a blind spot for the IT, because one, they're not the asset owner at the end of the day.
Yeah.
There's a lot of other decision makers determining what that technology is and how it's set up and configured within those environments. It really doesn't have a IT hand into it.
Mm-hmm. As I think I mentioned earlier, I was the CISO for a water authority, and that was probably my experience or my most exposure to engineers that have that requirement for availability or safety. Their vote weighs more than the cyber vote or the IT vote. Really, the operational vote was always going to win the day. And that required, unfortunately, political, thinking at times, or a lot of relationship building to understand, hey, I know that this movement has to happen. That's what's going to mean to me and my responsibilities. That's what you're talking about there, as far as having that exposure to the boots on the ground. Why did you change that? And who understood what was going to happen when it got changed? Right. How was the change management process, including somebody like the cyber leadership?
Well, it's because safety is always job one. And priority number two is reducing unplanned, unscheduled downtime.
Yeah.
And that's just not an area that IT spends a lot of time in having to deal with, either one of those. And because I've had CIOs just flat out tell me, I don't want to be the SCADA cop, right? That's, to them, it's like picking up a porcupine. No matter what you do, you're going to get stuck. So they just learn to leave the damn thing alone, I'm not saying that's right, but that's just been my experience, and this whole IT-OT convergence discussion has been a challenge, right? Sometimes we call it IT-OT collision, just the way those two groups have operated over the years, and they don't always sit down, because one's revenue generating part of the business, and the other one is kind of an overhead administrative provider. Right. Shifting gears a little bit, let's talk about AI. So I just got my hands on the World Economic Forum that just was this past week. There was a report pushed out from, I think it was Accenture that wrote it, that talked about AI is really moved up the scale in regards to challenges with cybersecurity, both good and bad. So what are your thoughts on that?
AI as a category, it's a tool. And so I'm not surprised that it can be used equally well in the, black hat environment or the white hat environment. The motivation of the user of the tool is what determines the outcome, right? So the tools themselves rapidly progressing into situations where I think the biggest impact is that it lowers the barrier of entry for a lot of people that maybe wouldn't have been able to technically grasp how to do a penetration test, or even understand the results of a penetration test. Maybe they understand how to run a tool, but then when they get the results back, they just don't know what it means. And so I think that has lowered that barrier of entry to a whole new category of people. Now, good or bad, right? You say, well, having to learn how to build the set out of the erector set in the Lincoln logs, like that is part of it, right? And that is what you become, how you become a well-versed expert, is because you understand how the building blocks go together. But then at the same time, there's been lots of opportunities that we can look at in the past where technology was adopted. You got those early movers that have to be the widget builders, but then it becomes an application layer type experience. And AI went from needing to understand how to be a widget builder in almost any AI application to it's a fully user UX experience. There's no technology knowledge required. That happened so fast. And so I don't think, we're in the first little inch of the inchworm on understanding the impact of cybersecurity. We don't even have the sheet pulled up to understand what's under there yet. That's kind of my take on it.
Yeah, because I will tell you that in the work that we've been doing for the last several years and working in the manufacturing space, I've yet to find a client that's got 100% visibility into their entire industrial complex per se.
No.
Right.
It's hard.
But if you're a CISO or CIO on the IT side, you've done everything you can within your power to have that asset inventory and understand the risk and vulnerabilities associated with those assets that are within that IT leadership's control. But back to our earlier discussion on IT and OT, we just don't see that, and it's creating, to your point about, I call it alert fatigue, right? When we put in these OT IDS tools, the amount of information that comes flying up and out of there, stuff that they've never seen, right? They think they have 3,000 assets, you got 10,000 assets in this plant, multiply that across, 50 plants that you have, and all of a sudden it becomes just an overwhelming, slog of data how do I organize this? How do I prioritize this? What does this mean? Without internal resources that have done this work. So then you got to rely on maybe third parties, these consulting groups, the services organizations, and you got to find them. And there's not very many of them out there per se. In the IT side, you can find it, and from an IT perspective, but on the OT side, not so much.
I think there's it's been around for a few years already. I can say that confidently. But as I was talking about earlier, the apprehension around deploying stricter segmentation or zero trust, or increasing the level of scrutiny within your internal network. That's one area where AI, even a few years ago, in the very big offerings, your Cisco and those level, Juniper and those kind of guys, they had that capability where it would sense the network for a couple days or a week, and then it would give you a menu of options as the person that was going to configure the box to say, hey, okay, these connections make sense. These connections don't make sense. Don't authorize those. And it was a way to fast track your deployment of a much heavier segmentation within your network, where something that might take 3 or 4 people, a couple of months to conceptually map out and then start to execute. You got there in about a week or two, and then a week or two of tweaking, and only one person doing it for a few minutes a day. So that's just one example that's already 5 years old. So I can only imagine, I haven't peeked into that, in the last couple of years, how robust some of those capabilities are now.
Yeah, well, and the infrastructure is still light. The life cycle of OT assets is measured in decades. It's not in a few years.
Yeah.
We still find large flat networks that are out there in these plants. So you got, I call it the dogs and cats are living together, as far as the communications. They're not doing the micro segmentation. And even if they are, they're doing it at such a high level, they're not down in that control layer to determine why is utilities talking to my filler, per se, packaging line, that conversation doesn't need to happen. And if you're talking to the plant, they don't know why that's there. So then you got to wind your way through OEMs and SIs to determine why
is there a dependency? If I disconnect it, what happens? Right. And I'm an Army guy, right? So I'm authorized to pull the plug and stand there and watch and see what happens, right? I was the guy that said, yeah, we can do that. So
the plant people don't like doing that.
No, we weren't making money with our stuff. We were doing other things. There was no revenue associated with pulling the plug.
Right. It could have been a safety issue. They think something bad could really happen, just damage equipment or somebody get hurt, or just the loss of revenue that you might sustain. Which I've seen that happen. I've seen somebody pull the wrong cable and shut a plant down for a day, and they lost $1 million too, because the furnaces came down. And you can't stop a furnace when it starts shutting down. You got to bring it all the way down to a safe state before you can bring it back. That takes a day. So now I've lost a day of production because somebody pulled the wrong cable and the network froze and the control system said I'm out because I can't communicate. So they fault safe, and they start making it, they orderly shutdown, right?
Yeah, it's that easy.
Yeah. I always say that when it comes to an event, the first responder is your operator. It's not some IT group. It's the operator,
Sure.
So, well, is there anything that you want to touch on that we haven't touched on in our discussion here?
Yeah.
Any topics?
Well, as we've been talking about, and I know earlier I said we're talking about segmentation. There was an item that I had mentioned when we were setting up the show about there's a new device that I want to tell people about. And it is something that I had never heard of. And I got an opportunity to do a bench assessment, a cybersecurity assessment on this device, do a vulnerability exposure. And that was about 3 years ago. I did a project with some college interns, and it was a great opportunity, and it was a proof of concept for my company. As I worked on this device, I understood how it worked, and it was one of those situations where I could immediately see the application in so many different locations, industries. I called the water authority that I had worked at and said, like, you guys have to see this right now. I was reaching out to my old military office and telling them that I wanted them to see it. And so after about a year of working with the company, and I decided I didn't want to do any evaluations for them in the future. I wanted to tell people about the device. And so this device is called Firebreak. It's from a company called Goldilock. They have started most of their work over in Europe. They're a UK-based company, and they've got a big footprint in Europe, but they're in the US now as well. And for this group, the application for any OT or industrial situation is that this device is a layer 1 air gap device. You can put it in at a rack or in a data closet, and where your inbound internet connection is coming in, it's got multiple Ethernet ports lined up. It just looks like a regular piece of rack equipment, but the top one and the bottom one, inbound and outbound. The technology inside of it that allows you to pull the plug remotely is that there's a motor behind those two wires, and there's a servo that rotates a metal connection. And so when that metal connection rotates in one direction, it opens and the wires are no longer connected. And then when it rotates back, it closes, and now your network's back online. Mm-hmm. And so you can remote control that device through a bunch of different ways. There is a data port on the back, so you can have it on a separate network. If it's controlling one network and you want to remotely just have, a way to interface with it with a dashboard, you can do that. Management interface. It's got a little management interface, or it's got SMS capability, which is what I was most interested in. So you could deploy it somewhere, put a SMS, cell phone card in there, and text message the box. You text message a specific string of characters, and that's the command to open or close whatever numbered port you want on there. Or you can send it like an emergency command, close all, open all. And you get that feedback right away to somebody's console, even if you get a text message back to you and back to the control console. And it's within a second. You send that text message as the latency of the network is the longer delay. The actual open or close, you can do that once a second. You can pre-program it as well. So if you don't want to have a SIM card in it, you just want it to be able to know, if it's on and live and it has a clock associated with it, you can say, be open from this time and close at this time. And so that capability of, let's say you got a station, I live near the mountains. You've got a radio station up at the top of the mountain, and it's your trunk mobile radio that talks to all your crews that have all their trucks. And that thing starts to have problems. It takes you maybe a whole day to drive up to the mountain, check on it, see what's going on, replace something, come back down. What if you could just turn it off, isolate it, right? There's all sorts of, as we were talking about earlier, the outstations that you have for any kind of industry. If you've got a remote location and it's got internet connectivity, and then it's got that satellite dish right there, you can open or close that connection as needed. Maybe you want to control your bandwidth so that you're not using up money. And it's not even a security need. It's just a way to make sure that it's only talking when it's supposed to. There's 20, 30 different applications.
So it's a human in the loop, right?
Yes.
Per se.
Right. Yes.
Okay.
There are ways to do it without a human in the loop.
So you can program it. So like you said, I want to open between 12 and 2 on Saturdays. And so you can schedule.
You can also API trigger it. And so we had some use cases where, let's say you have a security system, and the security system is pretty advanced, so it can draw a box around an intruder. And if somebody's at your gate trying to get in, or there's somebody inside the facility and the security camera system sees that, draws a green box and says, there's a person, that can hit an API, disconnect your network. So there's a lot of different ways to trigger it, and there's a lot of different ways to manage how data is going in and out of it you can make it sort of a man trap port for data. So data goes in. If you got a DMZ, you can send data into one area, disconnect the network, and then allow the internal network to come get its download. That way you don't have a full connection open if you're doing something like firmware updates.
Yeah. So is it like a container per se?
It is physical layer 1 only. There's no IP address associated with those ports. It's just the cable connection in and out right there.
Like,
Yeah.
So you're controlling that servo.
Yep.
Yeah. That's
so
cool.
it's just a really cool device that I think if anybody listening has the light bulb has gone off for them and they have air gap concerns, something to look into, something that I think, I say I'm an evangelist. I want critical infrastructure to be protected. And I see this as a way to really be able to throw the switch. So
perfect. Very cool. Yeah. When I started way back in the day, and I'm talking 80s, we used to have the old AV switch. Remember?
Mm-hmm.
To open or close comms based on whether I want to move from one system to the next, or I want it to be offline until I want it to be online for somebody to gain remote access per se.
Yeah. So, Yep. So this is just the modern version of that, and then they do it on
almost like a PLC. I mean, that's how PLCs operate, right?
Yep. And it's got whatever Ethernet and fiber. So there's different options. Yeah. So just something that I'd like to share the word anytime I get a chance to talk to different industries and different folks. Yeah. So I appreciate the opportunity to mention that.
Take a quick question. Have you ever heard of Chasm Technologies? Chasm? Did you ever get a chance to look it up? It came out of the DoD space. It's been in there for over a decade. It has to do with it's not anything to do with what Proof Labs, but it's more of a workstation streaming. Right?
No, I can't say that I have. Yeah.
It's something worth taking a look at. We're looking at it for managed services platform. So I didn't know because you came out of the military. If you'd come across Chasm, it's KASM is what it is.
Yeah. No, I have not.
Okay. Well, I think some of your brethren from your military days are very familiar with Chasm. So it came from that space. It's just now kind of inching its way out into the commercial world. They let it out. So, well, it's been great. It's nice meeting you.
Yeah, thanks, Dino. I appreciate the opportunity. And as I had said, I think it'll be an easy day for both of us. So it's been a great conversation.
Yeah. You're not going to S4, are you, at the end of the February? The OT Cybersecurity Conference down in Florida?
No, I stick to space. If I have to travel, I try and keep it directly, space customer focused. We're in go-to-market mode. So I'm going to have a lot of movement around needing to go to conferences, talking to people about satellites.
Yeah. You haven't been to space, have you?
I wish. No. Funny story there. When I was deployed to Afghanistan, I got in touch with, there's an Army major that worked at NASA. And I said, hey, I figured I'd use I'm in a war zone, so you have to talk to me. Because otherwise I knew he'd just be like, you're not qualified for this at all. And just like hang up on me. But I managed to get a phone call with him and tell him I wanted to be an astronaut. Right. And he said, yeah, no, you're not. You're the wrong type of everything as far as what the Army is concerned to be an astronaut. So like, I don't know, get out of the Army and then maybe you could be an astronaut. So, but I put in the call. I did.
Well, good. All right, Dick. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Dino. Take care.
Thanks for tuning in to the Industrial Cybersecurity Insider. To stay up to date with our latest episodes, be sure to click the follow or subscribe button now. And if you found this podcast helpful or have a topic you'd like us to discuss, please leave us a review or let us know. Thanks again for listening. See you next time.